Hello and welcome to Latika Takes, a podcast with me, Latika Bourke. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you as always for listening. A really good guest for you lined up today. His name is Mike Nellis. He was a former advisor to Kamala Harris, and he popped up actually on my LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and I said, you know what? I really want to know how the mindset of the Democrats is and why they're acting almost like they lost when the election result was quite close, and also why we are not really seeing anything of a fight back from the Democrats, given that the first month and a half of this Trump administration has been so much more radical in its first 6 weeks than maybe even the kind of first couple of years of Trump 1.0. So Mike happily said he would join the podcast, and we caught up actually just after those shocking scenes in the Oval Office. And we discussed that a little bit about how that might play into how the Democrats respond. But this episode is really a look back at what the Democrats got wrong and a look forward to how the Democrats can try and combat Trump and try and overcome MAGA, and a look at some of the infrastructure problems I think that the left faces. Mike disagrees with me a bit on a couple of those things. Let's get into it. I began by asking Mike Nellis just how the Democrats blew it so badly.
Democrats made a lot of key mistakes, but the first thing you have to acknowledge is that there was a global inflationary crisis that made the fundamentals of the election really difficult. And you're seeing ruling parties getting destroyed in almost every major democracy, with no ideological through line to it either. And I think that kind of has to be acknowledged here. But in terms of how Democrats blew it, the original sin of this last election was Joe Biden deciding to run for re-election when he wasn't fit to do so. And I think more Democrats need to be honest with themselves about that. We've been too insular on it. And yes, I think the way that the media covered it was unfair. And yes, I think the way that Republicans maliciously edited clips to make Joe Biden seem like he was off to the races somewhere was wrong. But there was a real challenge here. Like, we didn't have use of the presidential bully pulpit in the way that we should have for the last 4 years. Joe Biden did a really poor job in that debate and freaked us out. And so what we should have had was Joe Biden should have lived up to his promise, allowed for there to be a full primary so that we could have Kamala and the other great Democratic talents that we have compete for that. I believe most likely Kamala would have won that primary, and she would have been a better candidate for it with a stronger campaign and a stronger message coming out of it. But she didn't get the opportunity to do that. And instead, after the disastrous debate, we picked her with 100 days left to go. We nominated her super quickly, which was probably the only thing we could have done in that situation. Mm-hmm. But we gave her 102 days to build a presidential campaign. She damn near won, but it's a hard thing to ask somebody to do. And I think way too many Democrats are unwilling to admit that we completely blew this last election. I believe this election was very winnable and we blew it.
Is there fury at the Bidens for this?
I'm mad at Joe Biden. I won't speak for anybody else. I think Democrats are a lot of Democrats just unwilling to do it right now, unwilling to talk about it right now. And I think what happened was nobody wants to go up against a sitting Democratic president. But I think everybody wants to be on the same page, particularly when we're facing such a threat in Donald Trump, who is an absolute disaster of a president. And I think we can get into more about why I feel that way. But I think people really wanted to win. And frankly, Joe Biden's the only person who's ever beaten Donald Trump in an election. And I think that's an enticing talking point. I'll also say that Democrats have a tendency, at least in my lifetime, to not want to have public fights, to not fight with one another. And that's a mistake. I think we probably need to be a little bit more aggressive with one another and the different tribes that exist in the Democratic Party, and it'll lead to better outcomes.
That is so interesting you say that, because I've always thought one of the structural weaknesses of the political left, and I have seen this in Australia, I see it in the UK, and I've observed it from afar with you guys and what just happened with that last election, is sometimes your tribalism is actually your biggest weakness. Collectivism has been the uniting force of the left around the Western world, and that's a great thing. But actually, sometimes in politics, it's not the best thing.
I think that's right. I think I always frame it this way. There's a Brene Brown quote that I like that's really about relationships, but I think it sums up how I feel about the left sometimes, which is, the left cares more about being right than getting it right. And me, as someone, like, my job is to win elections, so I care a lot more about getting it right. And if you don't win, you didn't get it right. And so
I love that was a relationship quote originally,
yeah,
just quietly.
I love to borrow things from anywhere that I can because too much political commentary is super rote, in my opinion. But look, I think that we spend a lot of time caring deeply about the rules, caring deeply about the Constitution, caring deeply about being empathetic and nice to everybody. And what kind of happened in the last couple of years, like, Democrats have really gotten away from being able to, like, functionally get shit done. And that's been a huge problem. And I think, look, the last however many days it's been that Trump's been in office feels like it's been 1,000, but I'm pretty sure it's only been like 40 or 50 at most. And, like, I'm exhausted by it, but, like, I actually admire the pace at which he's getting stuff done. He's doing a lot of stuff in flooding the zone, and he's delivering on a lot of promises he made to his base. He's not making the promises he promised to make for the American people, like grocery prices aren't lower, housing isn't more affordable, IVF isn't free. So all the stuff that won the middle, he's not doing that, and that's a mistake. That's going to catch up with him in the next election. But where's my version of that? And Tim Walz actually said this week on a podcast, he was like, the next time we're in office, people aren't going to expect us to tinker around with Obamacare again. They're going to expect universal health care. And that's right. The one thing that Trump understands is I can move quickly and the rules are made of paper. They're not made of concrete. And I'll give him some credit on that because I want my Democratic version of that because I think our policies are better for people. And frankly, politics should be about improving people's lives, not this grievance era that we see from Donald Trump where he's not helping anybody. Nobody's been helped in the last 40 days. Nobody.
That's interesting you say that. We are in more agreement than I even realized when I asked you for this podcast, which sometimes makes for a boring podcast. But I wrote an article during that campaign actually being very critical of what I thought was Kamala Harris's, what we call in Australia and the UK, small target strategy, whereby you don't release any policies, you campaign on a vibe, a hopey, nicey, I'm like not that guy who's scary and awful, everything will be fine. And to me, I feel like we have hit a mood in the public where they actually want radical. Now, I think 5, 6 years ago, people didn't want radical, but they were spooked by radical. But I think we've actually come full circle from that. And Trump, as you've been explaining there, I think proves that point a bit. So who's going to drive that radical thought on the left?
I think that I'll actually push back a little bit and say I think people in America have wanted radical change for the entire time I've been in Democratic politics. And Obama campaigned on hope and change. Obama had big ideas and promised he was going to move the country forward. And to be honest with you, when you do focus groups with, like, middle of the road voters, like, you'll find all these people where their voter profile is 2008 Obama, 2012 Obama, 2016 Trump, 2020 Biden, and then 2024 Trump again. And it's like, what are they voting for and what do they stand for? These are people who are really getting screwed in this economy. Their paychecks are stretching out. They don't know how to buy a house. They don't know how to retire with dignity. They don't see a pathway to do that. They're struggling to start a family. And that's a huge problem. And so I think people have been crying out for major structural systemic change in an economy that doesn't work for them, with a government that's too slow and inefficient. And what Donald Trump has done a great job of is taking those critiques for a lot of people, latching on to them. What he's not done a good job at is delivering for the American people, because he's not doing any of that right now. He's just creating chaos, and prices are rising and wages are getting smaller. And it's a huge issue. I mean, today, the Atlanta Fed is projecting that the United States' GDP is going to contract in Q1. If that happens in Q2, we're officially in a recession. It will be a recession purely of Donald Trump's decision-making and nothing else. That frustrates the heck out of me because I want to help people. Like, at the end of the day, if we're not talking about how to help people get a good paying job, start a family, buy a house, retire with dignity, we're making a mistake. And that's where the question of, like, how we blew it on issues comes up, because 80% of the reason that we lost, in my opinion, is going to be inflation, the economy, not making people feel heard, not doing enough to make an immediate direct impact in their lives. Random stuff that Trump would bring up, and they're eating the dogs and cats and, like, all the weird stuff that gets outsized media coverage because it's salacious and interesting, but it doesn't have an actual impact in people's lives. Not at all. And if we had done a better job of articulating how we were going to help people, and if Kamala had more than 100 days to articulate that vision, she may have been able to do it, because she did have policies that I thought were very good. She wanted to have Medicare cover long-term care for seniors. That's crushing the middle class right now, who are paying for their parents who are living longer than they thought. That's a good idea. If she'd had more time to campaign on it, she might have been able to break through on it, but she didn't.
I'm going to push back on that a little,
Okay.
and I'm going to ask you about a comment you made previously. You believed that Kamala Harris could beat Donald Trump. Personally, this pains me to say it because I'm all for women in leadership, and I'm certainly for women from diverse backgrounds in leadership. But I strongly doubt that anyone but a white man can beat Donald Trump. Do you really think the American people, in the mood they were in, were going to vote for Kamala Harris and all that she brought in an anti-DEI climate against someone like Trump?
Yeah, I don't believe that Kamala lost because she was a woman, and I don't believe she lost because she was a woman of color. Now, I'm not saying that racism and sexism don't exist, because they absolutely do. But I don't think they're the defining reason that she lost. I also don't think they're the defining reason that Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 either. Like, for Clinton, she made a ton of crucial campaign mistakes that, like, we can really get into if you want to. I don't know how interesting the
Well,
past.
hang on. And I want to come back to that because I think
Okay.
Kamala repeated some of those mistakes. This is
Maybe.
actually what I was going to ask you about. All these celebrity appearances. What were you thinking?
I've never really liked any of that stuff, but it's easy for me to say that now when, like, 6 months ago, I was probably being like, Beyonce's at a Houston rally. I don't, that's
Come on,
not.
be honest. What were you actually saying 6 months ago?
I
Were you
remember
pro it?
6 months ago, I was trying to get my wife into that event because she wanted to go. So I was,
You're the problem,
when you're in
Michael
the
Nellis.
midst of
You're the
it,
problem.
I am part of the problem. Listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I have not contributed to the Democratic Party's problem, but I'm going to be part of the solution by questioning everything that I think. But look, I do think the American people are ready to elect a female president. I think the American people were ready to elect Kamala Harris 4 years ago when they elected her vice president of the United States to an ailing 74-year-old Joe Biden.
So that's true. We don't factor in how much they would have had to price that in at the time.
I think those things matter, particularly when your running mate is an older man. I think those things are a great deal. And keep in mind, there's all these voters that voted for Obama twice, and then they voted for Trump twice now too. You can't tell me that, like, all of those Obama voters suddenly became super racist in the last 10 years. I don't buy that. And I think it's a very lazy thing that people on the left say, is that they'll go, they voted for Trump because they wanted to hurt black and brown people and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. There's a Washington Post article from yesterday of a woman who, I think she lived in Michigan, and she was like, look, I don't really like Donald Trump. I didn't really like Joe Biden, but my grocery prices were high. I'm going through IVF right now, which costs more than 10% of my take-home pay. And Donald Trump said he was going to make IVF for free. And I believed him in the hopes that he would do it. And now I'm pissed because I lost my job and everything's a mess. So most people in the middle are trying to figure out who's going to help them. They're focused on their pocketbook. And it's much more simple than that. They're not. You and I are probably way more educated on American politics because we're on Twitter and we're on Blue Sky and we're reading and consuming as much of it. But most people aren't. They're working 2 jobs and trying to survive. And they're lucky if they can come home and crack open a beer and watch Monday Night Football. And I think we forget that. We think that people know as much as we do, and they don't. They don't.
Okay, let's leave the past behind. That's done and dusted. We now have Donald Trump, who, in my opinion, is far more radical this second term around. And as you said before, at such a pace that he didn't exhibit in his first term. And yet the Democrats are almost silent. What has happened to you if the election result was as close as you say it was?
I don't agree that the Democrats are silent. I don't agree with that take. Now, I think the Democrats have an imperfect communication strategy, and I think we have a lot of challenges that we'll get into on that. But the one thing I want to say is there are a lot of Democrats who are fighting back, but Democrats in Washington have no tools to fight back against anything that's happening right now. They can
What do you mean by that?
So they can filibuster legislation when it comes through, but they can't stop a reconciliation process for the budget. It's just not how the rules work. They can't stop Donald Trump's nominees because there's no filibuster on nominees. So people are going, Democrats do something, and it's like they can't do anything. Like, there isn't anything they can do. They can slow the process down as much as they can. They can oppose these things and get more organized. And again, I think it's a communications problem, but there isn't a lot they could do. There was nothing they could do to stop Pete Hegseth from being appointed to the Department of Defense. And there's nothing they could do. But most of them voted against all of the nominees. There were a few breakers here or there for, like, personal relationships and stuff like that. But I think they're doing the most that they can. The real problem that we have, and I would articulate this way, is, like, we have a generational challenge in the Democratic Party right now. Our leaders are too old, and God love them. I love many of them. I work for some of them. I've told them this. Like, we have a lot of folks who it's time to move on and let the next generation go. And this is the thing. I talk about it like this. We have a candidate alignment problem, which is that, and I think even for Kamala last year, we had a misalignment with the candidate. I think Kamala is a very good presidential candidate. I think she's a very good leader. I think that she should get more credit for what she accomplished in the last election. But I needed somebody that I could drop into the middle of a 3-hour Joe Rogan interview like that in this last election. And I'm not entirely sure that Kamala could do that. And frankly, her staff didn't think she could either. And that's a problem to me that we need to get past. Go ahead.
I'm really interested to hear your thought on that. And I agree. And I think the Republicans have the same issue, by the way.
Yes, they
But
do.
how come, if it's a generational thing, Trump can be dropped into a Joe Rogan podcast for 3 hours, but Kamala couldn't? And Trump is actually older. It's actually about the quality of the candidate, regardless of age at this point, isn't it?
Agreed. But Donald Trump had a whole lot of people around him that were making the conditions for him to be able to do those type of interviews a lot easier. When he goes on Joe Rogan, that is not hostile territory for him. When Kamala goes on Joe Rogan, it's hostile territory for her. So it's a different problem for her to have. But it's the same thing with, look, I love Chuck Schumer. I actually think he's a very good majority leader, but it's hard sometimes to see him shoot direct to camera videos. And then he uses a word that's very outside the mainstream. Like he was talking about, he was at a press conference and he was like, I have not seen the American people this aroused for political action. They're so aroused right now. And I was like, man, Chuck, I love you.
Step away.
Yeah,
Step
please don't
away.
use that word. That's not the word I want to hear right now.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge, but like we have very few members that can like be good on TikTok that I can drop into any room and they can do an interview. And like people will say, I love AOC because she talks like a normal person. Or they'll say, wow, Pete Buttigieg is such a good public speaker. One, it's because they're younger and they grew up in the generation where you needed to know how to shoot a TikTok and write a tweet and be able to do those things and not rely on people like me to do it for them. But also they've done them a couple thousand times. Pete Buttigieg is as good of a communicator as he is because when he was nobody, when he was the mayor of South Bend and he wanted to be somebody, he said yes to everything. Everything. He would say yes to every podcast without any question. He would say yes to every YouTube show, every news interview. I'm actually the same way. I view I'm not saying I'm going to become the next Pete Buttigieg. I have no interest in that. But like I say yes to a lot of stuff because I want to go on and get practice and have a conversation with an interesting person, knowing it'll make me a better communicator in the end. And we have way too many politicians that are risk averse. We have way too many consultants that are risk averse because the generational challenge is not just for our candidates. It's that we have a lot of like folks on the Hill that aren't retiring. We have a lot of folks on firms that aren't retiring at the DNC that aren't retiring. We need a new generation of this to fight. And the Republicans are having a new generation take over who run their campaigns. And yes, they've got the oldest man ever to be president, which is Donald Trump. He'll be the oldest person ever president when he's done. And he's very good at it, but he's an anomaly. Like he's their Obama. I have no other explanation for that. I actually think Trump is a pretty shitty candidate because they should have beaten us by way more last year. If you look at the fundamentals, we should have lost the 1984 style wipeout. And I think if they had nominated Nikki Haley, who is a much better candidate for them, they would have. Like Nikki Haley might have won 48 states.
Yeah, Nikki Haley was a very credible candidate, I thought. So I'm interested about that communication because I also think our generation and the generations below are far more forgiving with politicians, which means they can take more risks. So we've all grown up on social media a bit more now. So we know that there's going to be dumb things you've said out there. There might be some drunk photos. Heck, there might even be an explicit photo of you somewhere that floats around. But one, we're living in such an information and volume overload that people don't even have time to digest all the stupid stuff anymore. And if they do see it, it's like, oh, well, next, whatever. I mean, who hasn't seen someone's sex tape these days? Not at all saying that's ideal for a political candidate. But I really agree with you that this risk aversion in political communication is holding people back. And actually, Trump is a good example of that because he breaks all rules and gets away with them. Now, he's an anomaly, we know, but it does show you that there is a forgiveness level in the public that I think wasn't there 10, 20 years ago.
Let's also keep in mind, part of the competitive disadvantage the Democrats have is that we still feel shame. Like we have shame when we do something wrong, when we say something stupid. Donald Trump doesn't feel shame. He just doesn't. And honestly, it must be nice to never have anxiety. Or I don't know what else. I mean, he's probably got a million other problems. He seems like a miserable person to me generally, but it's hard. Like we pay a political price when we make mistakes on the left because our people actually care about those things. And right now, the right has become a shadow of itself where the only thing that they care about is grievance politics. They want to see us freak out. They want to see us hurt, and they don't care whether or not they're doing the right thing. Donald Trump talks about America first, but he doesn't give a shit about America first. It's Trump first. It's MAGA first. It's not America first. And like today, we were talking about this before we started recording, like this clown show of Trump in the White House with Zelensky, like that isn't America first. That was Russia first. Russia is loving what they're seeing today because they want to take Ukraine and they want to show strength and they want to continue to expand their territory in Eastern Europe. And that doesn't make anybody safe. But Trump isn't putting our interests first. He's putting his interests first and he's putting Putin's interests first. Same thing with Doge. they're cutting a lot of government spending. And I agree with them that there is a ton of wasteful government spending and fraud and abuse. But how many SpaceX contracts has Elon Musk canceled? How many Tesla contracts has he canceled? None. But what he has done is cut Meals on Wheels and cancer research for kids. And 71% of Americans oppose Medicaid cuts, but 100% of House Republicans voted for Medicaid cuts on Monday. So there's a misalignment. They understand the right problem and they're tapping into that problem. And then Democrats end up going, that's wrong. It's unconstitutional. It's not fair, blah, 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 blah. And what we do is we defend the system. We defend the system by accident. We don't mean to, but we do. And Trump is really good at trapping us on that. The system is broken. He's right about that. Government doesn't work for people. That's correct. He's making it work for him and his corrupt billionaire cabinet. We need to find a way to say, you know what? Yeah, the system is broken. We're going to make it work for you. And that's what we haven't been able to figure out yet.
Okay, listeners aren't going to be able to see my facial expression, but I think that was my light bulb moment. I was like, yes, that's exactly it, Michael. That's exactly it. They should hire you. Okay.
Some of them have, thank God.
Let's talk about a couple of the things that are contemporary and how you think they're affecting not the user me's, but everyday Americans.
Sure.
And then let's get to what's your strategy ahead of midterms. Let's go back to Ukraine, because this is obviously something I study a lot as a foreign policy kind of national security reporter. And so I'm really deeply invested and interested in this. And when you see what happened in the Oval Office, and my personal interpretation of this is that I think JD Vance was spoiling for a fight. Zelensky catastrophically took the bait. But the end result is they have decommissioned Zelensky, which is something they've been wanting to do. Now they can run back to Russia if they so choose, and I think that's probable, and say, look, we tried for peace. It's Zelensky's fault, so now we're doing business with Russia. How does the average American, not a MAGA American, how does the average American view the way that your foreign policy is changing so radically to hurt, insult, retreat, run, bully allies? And what it seems to look like is that you have very few words of criticism, this America, for your actual enemies or your foes.
I think it's an issue because if you get into the polling, like, people don't like this style of foreign policy, but it also doesn't seem to be something they're voting on right now. And so it's a good reminder that the vast majority of voters are incredibly self-interested. And it's not a criticism. I actually think that's right. My dad would always say, because I'm a big lefty with a big heart and all that, and I care about everybody. And as I get older, I become a more cold-hearted conservative probably. But like my dad would say, as my dad's a big Republican, he would say, I have to take care of my circle of people. That's me, your brothers, your mom, and myself. That's it. And if I'm taking care of there, then I can think about other people, and if I'm taking care of there, then I can think about the community.
I mean, that's totally human. And I think there's a lot of psychology to back that up, actually.
And actually, JD Vance said something super similar last week, and a bunch of people on the left were being like, look at this cold-hearted piece of garbage. And I was like, blah, blah. And I was like, guys, this is how people think. And we're so far removed from that. We've got to get more connected to like how regular people are doing, because regular people don't care about Ukraine. They're not voting for it. If you went into the ballot box on election day and you voted because of Ukraine, and I'll tell you, it was one of my top 3 issues, because I believe defeating Russia in Ukraine is a central issue to protecting like peace and security in the world. But that tells you a little bit about my economic situation, right? I didn't go into the ballot box being angry about inflation. I was in there and I was voting on abortion. I was voting on Ukraine, and I was voting on, I really didn't want to raise my son with Donald Trump in the White House, because this is the first president that my son will be aware of. And I really hate that, because I think it makes it harder for me to raise a decent human being, because he's such a miserable garbage person. I can't stand him. What I think Democrats haven't done a good job of, and this is Joe Biden's fault, frankly, it is. And it is, we have not explained to the American people why our involvement in Ukraine is so important to American interests nationwide, internationally. And this is, again, I said this earlier, we had an ineffective use of the bully pulpit over the last 4 years because Joe Biden couldn't do it. And part of why this shock and awe campaign with Trump is so jarring to people is they haven't seen somebody use the bully pulpit like that since Obama, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So it seems unusual for a president to be this engaged, but actually Obama's first 100 days, he was all over the place. It was awesome. It wasn't the same sort of urgency, but like he was doing a lot of stuff. We haven't had that. And partially that's COVID too, because Joe Biden's first 100 days, COVID was still raging. It was a disaster. But we have to stop asking people to vote in the best interest of somebody else.
Yeah.
And stop Like, this is where like telling people like your vote is important to save democracy. People don't understand what that means, and people don't feel that in their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, that felt very abstract. I was surprised how hard Biden kept running on that.
Yeah. And also, frankly, it's if you're a young person and you're 24 and like you just got out of college and you have $150,000 in student loan debt, you have nothing to offer a significant other, you have no idea how to get a job, no idea how to buy a house. You're like, what the hell has democracy ever done for me? That's, again, we're defending a system that doesn't work for people. Now, I don't think it's democracy's fault that things are messed up. But again, we defend the system and we don't localize everything to like how we're going to help people. And I actually, again, I thought Harris's campaign did a good job of that. She just didn't have enough time. She just didn't. So they doubled down on some things that I think they thought were easier paths because they just didn't have enough time.
I watched a lot of interviews with her, and I got to say, she did not impress me. There were some basic questions she just didn't have answers and policies for. And I completely take your point. If she'd been given time, she would have had a full suite of policies for sure, obviously. So we can agree to disagree on that.
It wasn't a perfect campaign. Like, I'm not one of those, it was the perfect, like, you see so many people that are like, she ran the best campaign ever. And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
It was a good campaign. They were dealt a bad hand, but they also made mistakes. And that's true of any campaign. But if 180,000 people vote differently, we would be talking about Donald Trump's stupid rally at Madison Square Garden, because Donald Trump made a ton of mistakes in this last election and was a very such campaign.
He did. How is Kamala Harris? Do you speak to her? Is she shattered?
No, I haven't talked to her for a long time. I worked for her for 5 or 6 years and built like her digital infrastructure from when she was attorney general until she became the VP, but I don't talk to her anymore.
It's sad. I felt like watching the inauguration was just so utterly bizarre to see her having to acknowledge him and be the person presenting him. It was a very strange spectacle.
That's a type of strength that I don't know that I have. I would have been scowling the whole time.
Yeah. There was a lot to admire about Kamala Harris for sure. Okay, so midterms are obviously your big target. History shows us that the House comes back, right? In midterms.
In theory, right? If you go based on like pure political theory, you would say that Democrats have higher propensity voters who are more pissed off right now, and they're more likely to turn out. And in the midst of all that, the American people love divided government, which is super frustrating in my opinion, but they love divided government. And I think people are going to say, wow, even if they like what Donald Trump is doing, which I imagine a lot of them do, they're going to go, I like what Donald Trump's doing, but there's got to be a check on him because I'm worried about X, Y, and Z, right? So I do think there was an Ipsos poll this week that had us ahead in the House races by 14%, like that by 14% of Americans plus wanted a Democratic Congress, and they only have a 3-seat majority. So I do think like we have the inside straight to get there, right? I think we should be able to do that if we run good candidates, if we pick the right message. The Senate will be a lot harder because the Senate map is just terrible for Democrats right now. It's going to be very hard to flip. We have to flip 4 seats to take it back, 3 to get a tie, and then JD Vance is the tiebreaker. It's hard to find 4 Senate seats, but again, stranger things have happened in an election cycle. Like Alaska is a state where if you drop $15-20 million into it, you can make a huge difference and win a Senate race. And we do have good candidates in Alaska that I have a lot of respect for. So it's going to be a question of how's the economy doing? How's Donald Trump doing? Are people fed up with this? People don't like this type of chaos. They really don't. And again,
so that's what I want to, I really want to drill down into this. How, from afar, America's friends are watching on just going, oh my God, this is
shaking your head.
We've never seen.
When we would hear about Berlusconi in Italy, we'd be like, what are you doing?
Yeah, we've never seen anything like this, but okay, this is what the American people voted for. Is that the case? Do the American people feel like they voted for what they're getting?
No. I don't think this is what the American people voted for. And because if you ask them, they'll tell you, I voted for lower grocery prices. I voted for more affordable housing. I voted for wages to get bigger. And Donald Trump hasn't done anything on any of those. It's incredible to me. The strategic mistake that they have made is they're not even doing anything that's even a modicum of I'm going to lower this. I'm going to do this, blah, blah. They're aggressively doing tariffs. They're aggressively cutting government spending in the dumbest way imaginable. And look, the idea of Doge is very popular. The actualization of Doge, not popular in the way that it's happening. And so people will say, I believe there's government spending. I don't like the way that it's happening right now. But if at the end of the day, like if it's 2 years from now and the economy is in great shape and grocery prices are cheaper, like Donald Trump promised, and wages are higher, like Donald Trump promised, they should take the House. They should expand, because that would mean that he did what he said he was going to do. And he was correct in those things. It's not going to happen. It isn't going to happen because it's very hard to reverse grocery prices. That's just a hard thing to do.
As Joe Biden knows.
Right. And these tariff wars are increasing prices. So you have a lot of American companies right now that are using these tariffs as a basis to raise prices, even if the tariffs aren't going into effect right now, because they're worried about they're going to happen in the future. So they're making cars more expensive, and they're making microwaves more expensive, and they're making like eggs are a mess in the United States because of the bird flu right now. And that's not Donald Trump's fault, but it is his responsibility to fix, and he's not doing anything to fix it. And
well, he did raise in his cabinet meeting eggs, I believe. I think they're
yeah,
going
he
to try
talked
and
about buying eggs, but like they have it. Trump is like, he just says a lot of stuff, and then you really got to watch what he actually does. And
oh boy, I know this lesson. Don't you worry.
yeah.
Okay. One of the early signs of life I have seen from the Democrats is Elon Musk. Him goading Trump, baiting him a bit about him being the real president. How much is Elon Musk going to shape a Democratic fight back?
Oh, he's our new boogeyman. He's a gift, in my opinion, just because people hate him so much, and the way that he conducts himself is just so outside of what people, I think, expect from leaders in the government right now. Bernie Sanders actually had a great quote yesterday, and I love Bernie, by the way. I'm a big D Democrat, but I love Bernie Sanders. I love anybody that can clearly and effectively communicate on issues. Bernie said yesterday, I don't care who Donald Trump appoints as the labor secretary, because the real labor secretary is Elon Musk. Pretty good messaging on that. And I like that quite a bit. And it's the reasoning he's going to use to vote against the labor secretary, even though he likes the labor secretary. That's good framework here. And look, Donald Trump is more popular than he was 4 years ago, partially because he's getting a more traditional honeymoon right now. That's going to fade in the next couple of weeks. James Carville said last week that we probably have about a month left of it. I agree with that take, but we'll see how it plays out. But Musk is going to be a very effective boogeyman for us. People don't like the idea of an unelected South African billionaire with government contracts making a decision about how the government should be spending its money. People don't like him lording over the cabinet.
Does him being a migrant himself really matter? Does that factor into anything much?
If I voted for America First, I'd have a real problem with it, I think. And I'm just imagining a lot of people are. And I don't believe that Elon Musk has anybody's best interest at heart except for his own. I don't. And the same with the rest of the corrupt billionaire cabinet. Like, this is the wealthiest cabinet in the history of the United States, which, when you think about it, is wild, because some of those early cabinets were just filled with the richest people in the country. That's wild. And these people are not going to do the work for the American people. And we have to make that clear to them. And I think a good point was raised yesterday by the Pod Save America guys, which is Democrats are getting more and more comfortable talking about, hey, these billionaires are corrupt. They're hurting you. And what we're not doing a good job of is going, but here's how they're hurting you. And here's why they're hurting you. We've got to connect that why to it. And Bernie Sanders is really good at that. And to me, the messaging can be as simple as they're putting money in their pocket, not yours. Elon Musk is cutting cancer research for kids so the government can give him a $400 million contract to build an armored Cybertruck. That's the setup here. They're not doing anything to help you. Like, you're not closer to buying a house right now. You're not closer to affording your groceries right now.
Okay. One of the big other challenges I see for the left, and I see this in the UK, I see it in Australia, and I certainly see it in the United States, is that about 10, 15 years ago, the left pretty much had control of social media. It was it was a much more favorable climate to the left on new media, and you had some pretty solid, stable existing media where you could go and find a non-hostile place to talk. Now it seems like social media has absolutely gone to the right, and it's been completely taken over or hijacked by a populist right. And so you're going to find it very hard to get your messages through those platforms. You have, I think, maybe a silencing or even a self-censoring climate potentially emerging in the United States, while MAGA is really strong at the moment. How do you actually deal with the media messaging infrastructure, which, in my mind, and I don't know if you agree with it, so please say if you don't, seems to be a bit more hostile to the left than it's ever been?
I think it's about as hostile to the left as it's always been. And I think the idea that there's been a media ecosystem that's been friendly to the left is silly. In the same way, though, while I believe there is a vast right-wing infrastructure that exists to spread disinformation, I also don't think it's the reason we lose elections. I don't. I think what did hurt us in this election was the culture jacking that the right did, where they infiltrated these like more cultural spaces like Pat McAfee's show and Joe Rogan's show and Theo Von and stuff like that. And we were really foolish to not engage in those spaces. That to me is a bigger problem. Like,
yeah, I mean, you guys were trying to do that in a 90s way, right? With the celebrity endorsements, but that's so outdated.
Yes, I agree with that. Personally, I think it was a mistake to campaign with rich celebrities wearing $40,000 dresses when people are struggling to purchase groceries. I just think that's a bad look. But also, the Republicans ran an out-of-touch billionaire who's never bought groceries in his life. There's a really funny video of Donald Trump in a grocery store in Pennsylvania in the last election where he's like pointing at stuff that like is at every grocery store in America looking like a doofus. We didn't do it.
But I always push back on this because people say that about like the Nigel Farages and the Boris Johnsons here too in the UK. But it only really matters if they're communicating a message that connects to everyday punters. It really doesn't matter if they buy their own groceries or not. It's how they project and communicate. And if they can come across to you as the common man, they've already won.
Even not so much the common man, but being anti-establishment. Like the way that Donald Trump talks is so deeply divorced from the way that any politician has ever talked in the history of the United States. And that's a huge asset. Like I tell my clients all the time, be different. It's okay to be different. Like we're trying to create these like factory built candidates. Like I believe the Democrats run better campaigns than Republicans do. I do. And I believe that because we overperform the fundamentals of elections all the time. We overperformed in 2022 based on the fundamentals of the election, and we overperformed in 2024 based on the fundamentals of the election. Now, it was just a horrible fundamentals for us. And then we made a bunch of other mistakes on top of that that are outside the purview of like election officials or campaign officials like me. Like I can't solve Joe Biden not dropping out earlier, which is what should have happened. I can't solve the fact that we didn't have a primary, which I think was a mistake. But I also don't think that Donald Trump or Nigel Farage have any secret magic to them. I think what they're actually doing is they are speaking up and saying things that a lot of people are saying in bars to their friends, and they're giving an outlet for men. Certainly, I think the most common thing between the two of them is that a lot of white men love the two of them. But I think the establishment is beating itself by playing by an old set of rules that doesn't work anymore, by defending systems and structures that don't work for people, and being unwilling to change and compromise and adjust. And that's the mistake. And I think that's the mistake. Fundamentally, that's the mistake we made in 16. I think that's the mistake we made in 24. But again, it's bigger than that because I really do believe both the 24 and 16 elections were very winnable. They were very winnable. And we made mistakes.
You're a lot more positive about that than I am. I really do despair about what I think is a deep polarization in how we talk to each other now. And I think it's more profound in the United States, but I certainly see elements of that even here in the UK.
I think that's real. I think that's a real problem, but I still think that like we could have won this last election. Like I do. The polarization gets you to 47, 48%. And that's what we would say. Donald Trump has a ceiling. It's 46, 47%. And in every election before this last one, he had never gotten beyond that. But I think that 2.5% that he gained is all inflation, is all people being absolutely frustrated with inflation, and maybe like a small percentage of them being frustrated with like the trivia, okay, which is then the border. And I would put the border as mostly an economic issue, I think, in most people's minds anyway. Like if you've seen the ad that the Trump campaign ran in the closing weeks of the election, where it ends with Kamala Harris is for they, them, not us, right? Which is a trans baiting ad.
Yeah.
One of the most brilliant political ads I've ever seen. Separating my own morals and ethics from it for a second, that's a brilliant ad. It should be in the ad hall of fame, right next to the Willie Horton ad, which is also like a brilliant and horrible ad from the 1992 campaign, I think. It might have been 88, but it's from one of those. And it's amazing. And it was a really good ad. And we know what it did? It othered Kamala Harris. It made her seem like the weird one. In an election where Donald Trump is definitely the weirdest person ever to be president of the United States. Definitely, no doubt about it. But they made Kamala seem weird. And that's
What's so weird about Hannibal Lecter? I don't understand, Mike.
Most people don't see that stuff.
Oh man, I saw that stuff a lot. I thought that was crazy.
Sure, but your information diet is very different from like the media.
Yeah, I think I've watched every Trump rally for the last 3 years, actually.
Oh, that's way more than me. I didn't watch any Trump rally.
Oh, I watched them all. I tell within the kind of 6 weeks before, I was like, yeah, he's winning. How vulnerable is MAGA as a movement without Trump? Or do you think MAGA as a movement is in the American bloodstream now?
No, I think MAGA will be in the bloodstream, but I have a question of, can somebody take that mantle and run with it? And I don't know who that person is, because Donald Trump is such a unique figure. I think that, look, when Obama got elected in 2009, there were a ton of very optimistic Democratic strategists, not me, because I was too young to even have this thought, but they would tell you, we have a permanent coalition going forward that will be unbeatable now with Barack Obama. They'll never be able to beat this coalition, blah, blah, blah. And then 2012 kind of reinforces that. And then you go, okay, we get to 16 and now we're going to run Hillary Clinton and we're going to test this out. And then they run Trump. Oh my God, it's great. And then we lose. Close, but we lose again. I think it's the same thing here. I think MAGA will have a huge problem without Donald Trump, and there's nobody to fill that void. And what'll probably happen is it'll split into 5 different things.
Wait,
and
so you
unless
don't
it's
think
like some
JD
unifying person, then keep it together.
You don't think JD Vance can take this mantle?
I don't want to be like overly confident in my take, but I think JD Vance has a glass jaw, and I look forward to throwing the first punch.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Trump is he's actually very funny. And so he can get away with saying a lot of crazy things like the Hannibal Lecter things and just come across as kooky, crazy, funny almost. But JD Vance, he lacks that affectionate humor. And I think he comes across very spiteful, which I'm not sure how that goes down in American politics.
JD Vance is a very polished politician. There's nothing wrong with that. We have lots of those on our side, but he's going to be a more traditional politician. And I have a hard time believing that the hardcore MAGA people are going to come out for him unless, look, JD Vance's political career will be solely attached to how Donald Trump's second term goes.
Yeah.
If it's a successful second term, and if at the end of it, people are like, man, I love Donald Trump. He's great. He did exactly what he said, 55% approval rating, he's probably going to win. But if that's what happened to Kamala. Like, you could talk about Kamala's flaws as a candidate, but like, she was purely dragged out by being associated with Joe Biden. That's what happened.
True. Because she couldn't disown his policies without, it was a very difficult situation.
That's the risk you take when you're VP, right? Now, maybe 2 years in, Donald Trump croaks of a heart attack while eating a fillet of fish, and he's president. All of a sudden, he has 2 years to define himself. Could be a very different place. I don't know. But I have a hard time believing that Vance is going to be somebody who can do that unless Donald Trump is like generationally successful, which like I am really skeptical.
Okay. So if you had to choose 3 things or ways that if you're charting between now and midterms, how you'd advise the Democrats to start drawing this path back, what would they be?
Elevate a new generation of Democratic leaders at every level of the party. Stop treating people like statistics and start treating them like stories, because I think we need to do a better job of storytelling. Donald Trump is an amazing storyteller, absolutely full of shit, but he's an incredible storyteller, and I admire it. And then I think 3 is stop asking people to vote for someone else. And I watched this play out so many times in this last election, and I was on a lot of conference calls screaming about it. But the Harris campaign and affiliated groups spent a ton of money on ads targeted at people who look like me, who were white men, married white men, getting them to vote for their wife's abortion rights, which nothing wrong. I agree with that. I'm with them on that.
Yeah, I remember one of these ads. I thought it was a very good ad, though.
There's some really good ones. That one they shot in Texas with the woman who had to get her stomach cut open is really hard to watch and a very good ad. But where are the ads telling me why Kamala Harris is good for me? And that's my problem, is like Kamala Harris put out a policy that was I think it was like Kamala Harris's policy for black men, right? It was a list of things she was going to do for black men. It's great. I have no problem with that. And a lot of stuff in it was stuff that I like. Where's my version? And one thing that I think gets lost in this is, yes, 90% of black women supported Kamala Harris, right? And only 40% of white men voted for Kamala Harris, 41% actually. But twice as many white men voted for Kamala Harris than black women, because that's how many white men there are in the country. And so if we're going to do identity-based politics, and there's arguments for it and there's arguments against it, but if we're going to do it, it has to be for all identities. It has to be for all identities, and that includes white men. And so I think part of the mistake is stop asking white men to vote for somebody else's interests. And why don't you go have a conversation with young men and white men and other men, because we lost a lot of other men too in this last election, and give them a reason to vote for us too. And not because they care about their wives. I do care about my wife, but I'd also like to know how you're going to help me. And I think that's a reasonable place for most people to be.
You've just prompted my next question perfectly. That doesn't sound like you're that much into identity politics. And if we are to take anything from some of what I think are the early successes of Trump, is his ability to just spear right through some of the overreach of the left, where you've been on trans, where you've been on DEI. Personally, I think plastic straws were, okay, that's taking it a bit too far, but I
hate plastic straws. I'll go on the record right now and tell you I hate the paper straws. I hate them so much.
So you can see how he's actually going, you know what, we're just going to call it out for what it is. This stuff is stupid. It's gone too far. I don't have a clue why the left ever got themselves into these positions where they're defending this tiny, minute sectional interest. Do you see amongst your Democratic friends any appetite for understanding that you overreached and that you need to course correct on some of these things?
Yeah. Yeah. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I'm certainly one of them that think we made a lot of mistakes here and we need to figure out the right way we talk about things. Now, what gets me hot and bothered is when I hear people say we need to abandon the trans community altogether. I think that's ridiculous. But we do get to choose how we talk about these things and when we talk about these issues and the way we talk about them. And you say that to some politicians, they act like it's bold advice from a Democratic strategist. But I think it should be like common knowledge. Like that they them ad that Kamala shot where she was talking about like transgender inmates. I don't have any ill will towards them, but like why were we ever talking about that? It's not an issue that resonates with the vast majority of people, and it makes us seem like we're weird. Now, if we're going to talk about the rights of transgender people, we should be talking about it in universal ways that people understand, which is let's make sure that everybody has a right to own a house and have housing. Let's make sure everybody has a right to have a job regardless of their identity. We can talk about those things. And on the DEI front, Donald Trump has taken, look, DEI, and I run a company that's very diverse. We have a lot of DEI practices. I'm very proud of them. Like I'm a white man who runs like a 50-person company. I got to get this right, and I try to get it right. But there's what I admire about some of the things that Donald Trump has called out here. There are a lot of stupid corporate performative DEI stuff that is like a waste of time and isn't helpful to anything. And like my favorite example of this is people were super mad around the Super Bowl this year because they removed the stop racism sign from the NFL field for the Super Bowl because Trump was going to be there. Now, maybe doing it because Trump was going to be there was the wrong reason to do it. But who is going to see a stop racism sign at an NFL game and go, oh man, I was going to be racist today, but I guess I'll just, you know what? They convinced me. Like that's stupid performative virtue signaling that corporate America loves to do. But the NFL does have some pretty cool and innovative DEI policies and initiatives that actually do help create opportunity for everybody in their organization. They kept those. So as much as the NFL is a very conservative institution in American society, they did the right thing. Target didn't do the right thing, which by the way, Target is a more liberal institution in American society, which I don't really understand there. I'm tired of corporate virtue signaling, but I want to continue to create equal opportunity for everybody. And that's what we should do. And we should push right through because Donald Trump's now using DEI to like fire, like they're firing every trans person in the US military. That's ridiculous. They're firing Black generals at the Pentagon and claiming it's because of DEI. And that's ridiculous. They don't have enough FAA. If they blamed the plane crash in DC on female pilots.
And now they're trying to hire. I saw Elon today asking for FFA pilots because there's a shortage.
If you are a retired FAA worker, can you please?
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right?
It's incredible. But like, again, the pendulum swings back and forth. And I think probably to a certain degree on culture, the pendulum swung way too far to the left. And right now the pendulum is swinging way too far to the right. And people will revolt against that too, because the vast majority of Americans are very good people. They are not racist. They're trying to sort out their lives. Maybe they're comfortable with Donald Trump's racism. I think you can't find many people that would say he isn't a racist, but they're not racist. And so the pendulum will swing back and we'll be okay. And we've got to modulate the way we talk about certain things. And the other thing too is there was a time where it was cool to be a Democrat and it was fun to be a Democrat. And in the last couple of years, it hasn't been fun. And I'm a little bit tired of being told and I get this in my, like, I've got like 160,000 followers on Blue Sky. If I'm tweeting about college football, I get people that are like, oh, why do you watch College Game Day? Pat McAfee's such a chauvinist. And I'm like, can I just enjoy football on a Saturday? Like, I'm working hard. Can I just watch Notre Dame beat the shit out of Navy, please? That's all that I want. And or if the one day I went to a Bert Kreischer show, and Bert Kreischer is this, I don't know if you know who he is. Oh, you do? Okay. He's a dumb male comedian that always has his shirt off and makes stupid jokes. And I had a great time. I often joke it was the closest I've ever been to going to a MAGA rally, but he's funny and a funny comedian. I enjoyed him. And like tomorrow I'm going to see Tom Segura. And if I post about those things, I still do because I want people to know that I'm out there doing this stuff. People will go, that's horrible. I can't believe you like his jokes, blah, blah. I'm like, just let me have fun. If you don't like a comedian's jokes, turn off the TV. Don't go to their shows. It's fine. Shane Gillis is hosting SNL tomorrow. Like, I'm sure the meltdown on the left will be ridiculous. But in the same way, Chelsea Handler made a stupid joke about Melania Trump, like at the SAG Awards the other day, and the right went nuts. So like the far right and the far left need to chill out and just let people enjoy entertainment. That's all that it is. It's fine.
100%. I have long thought, as someone who's been online and in reporting on politics for a good 15 years now, I have honestly sometimes thought that your own supporter base are your own worst enemy when it comes to this stuff. And I see the right now, and going back to my earlier comment about how I think the right has taken over some of these media infrastructure, particularly on social, I see them making the same mistake. And I think they're going to overreach on this too.
The right loves cancel culture. Like they pretend like they don't because
I
for the first time in
know.
a long time, cancel culture didn't work for them. But when they're in power, they
Correct.
love cancel culture. They love going after the Dixie Chicks. They love going after Bud Light, and they'll do a million other stupid things like that. But you know what? People are still drinking Bud Light, and people are still listening to the Chicks, even if they drop the word Dixie out of their name. So,
Oh, did they? I liked the
yeah,
Dixie
they're just
Chicks.
the Chicks now.
I didn't realize they had a rebrand.
I don't listen to them. My wife loves the Chicks, so
The Chicks.
a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. They have
Final
one
question.
song about the lead singers getting divorced. That's really good.
All right. I remember the one about not ready to make nice, but that was George W. Bush, which seems a lifetime ago.
It was
Of
like
Republican.
2 years ago. They had a new album.
Okay, I'll listen to it after. Okay, final question.
All right.
For people who aren't close-up observers of US politics in terms of going deep beyond the White House, which I think probably more of my listeners would be like this. Who would you give me? Maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5 names of Democrats you think are going to emerge, rise, and potentially be the next one or ones? Who should we all be watching and looking out for?
I was just having this conversation with somebody, and one of the things that I said to them was, when it was 2006 or 2005, and we just lost to George W. Bush, which I was like 18. I was like, was anyone describing Barack Obama as the nominee that would deliver us the Senate and the House and the White House? So I don't know, but like I think that my guess is that they're going to be not from DC. They're going to be not from the Biden administration. They're probably going to be a governor, or they're going to be somebody that's like ancillary outside of that ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have her book back here. I'm a huge fan of Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. I think she is incredible. I think people should go listen to her State of the State address this week, where she did just an incredible job of framing like how she's taking care of the people of Michigan. She was talking about housing. She was talking about young men. I know I just said non-DC, non-Biden, but I love Pete Buttigieg. And if I think there was somebody who was going to overcome that, it would be somebody who brought the sincerity that he brings to that. My governor, J.B. Pritzker, who's the governor of Illinois, is an amazing governor. Again, we'd be running our own billionaire at that point, but maybe that's what we need right now. But he has been truly an incredible an incredible governor. Also an incredible billionaire too. I could see a path for a John Fetterman, see a path for an AOC. I'd have a hard time seeing AOC winning a general election, even though I have a lot of admiration for AOC. We have a really good, solid bench of talent. And the last time we had a real full primary that didn't have a former vice president in it or didn't have a former cabinet secretary in it, like Hillary Clinton was in 2016, we nominated Barack Obama because we have better politicians in the Democratic Party than the Republicans do. And the mistake that we made was we didn't have a full primary in 2016 because Hillary Clinton wiped the field because people didn't want to run against her, which no problem. And we didn't have a full primary this time. The 2 times we lost to Donald Trump were times we didn't have full primaries. And that's a mistake. So I look forward to the worst to come is how I frame it.
Okay. Mike Nellis, that is all my questions. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I found this conversation really fascinating. I hope you did too. And please, as always, leave me any feedback or thoughts or ideas or comments here on Substack or on any of the podcast apps that you listen to. You've been listening to Latika Takes with me, Latika Bourke. You can find my work at latikambbourke.com and this podcast where you find all your podcasts. See you next time.